The security footage flickered on Rebecca Langford's computer screen, casting a blue glow across her precisely arranged office. It was nearly midnight, yet the newly appointed CEO of Elysian Foods remained, reviewing the day's reports with the same methodical attention that had propelled her to the top. The email from security had seemed routine, until she opened the attached video file. There, moving quietly through the company's test kitchen at 2 a.m, was Thomas Gray, the night janitor. His movements were deliberate as he adjusted equipment, occasionally making notes, and carefully packing samples of their soon-to-be-launched organic food line into his own containers. Rebecca leaned closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing. With the company's most ambitious product launch just weeks away, she couldn't afford security risks. "I'll handle this myself," she whispered, closing the laptop with a decisive click. Stay with this story to discover how the most overlooked person became the one who transformed her entire life and her company. Thomas Gray arrived at Elysian Foods headquarters precisely at 11 each night. The same worn leather bag slung over his shoulder, the same faded blue work clothes, pressed and clean. At 43, his face carried the quiet dignity of a man who had weathered storms but refused to be defined by them. The night security guard nodded as Thomas signed in, a ritual repeated 5 nights a week for the past 3 years. "Evening, Thomas." The janitor smiled politely in return, his voice soft but clear. "Good evening, Frank." The exchange rarely varied. Thomas was known for his consistency, his thoroughness, and his virtual invisibility within the corporate structure. The daytime employees knew him only as the reason their workspaces were immaculate each morning, if they thought of him at all. In the employee break room, a group of marketing executives had once left behind half-eaten catering from a product meeting. Thomas hadn't simply cleaned up, the night supervisor had caught him carefully separating the untouched food, packaging it with the precision of someone who understood food safety. When questioned, Thomas had quietly explained that perfectly good food shouldn't go to waste. The supervisor had shrugged it off. Thomas was odd but efficient, and that was all that mattered. No one had noticed how his weathered hands handled the kitchen knives with unexpected skill, or how he adjusted the flame on the industrial stoves with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with professional kitchens. Rebecca Langford's morning began at 5:30 with a 5-mile run, followed by a protein shake, and exactly 45 minutes with her 10-year-old son Nathan before her driver arrived. At 34, she had already climbed the corporate ladder with remarkable speed, moving from head of global corporate social responsibility to chief operations officer before the board unanimously voted her as CEO 3 months ago. Her corner office on the 32nd floor offered panoramic views of the city, though she rarely paused to admire them. As a single mother who had clawed her way up through male-dominated executive ranks after her husband had left them for his administrative assistant, Rebecca trusted only in measurable results and verifiable data. The quarterly board meeting had gone precisely as she'd planned. "Gentlemen, our sustainability initiatives were costing us $7.2 million annually with no measurable impact on consumer behavior," she explained, flipping to the next slide. "By redirecting those funds to product development and strategic marketing, we've increased quarterly profits by 9% while maintaining our brand image." The board members nodded approvingly. This was why they'd chosen her. Rebecca was ruthlessly efficient, cutting the company's charitable programs and community investments while somehow spinning it as progressive business strategy. That evening, as her driver took her home, she received another text from Nathan's school. She had missed his science fair presentation. It was the 3rd school event she'd missed that month. Rebecca stared at her phone for a long moment before texting her nanny to buy Nathan a new video game as an apology. Thomas and Rebecca existed in the same building, but in entirely different worlds. While she attended executive lunches in the top-floor dining room, he ate his carefully packed sandwich alone in the maintenance break room. When she reviewed spreadsheets detailing which departments could withstand further budget cuts, he meticulously sorted recyclables that others had tossed into regular trash. Once, they had passed in a hallway, Rebecca walking briskly while dictating an email into her phone, Thomas pushing his cleaning cart to the side to let her pass. She hadn't noticed him at all. He had noticed everything about her. The designer shoes that clicked authoritatively on the marble floor, the slight fatigue around her eyes hidden by expensive makeup, the way she carried tension in her shoulders. Thomas noticed everything. It was both his gift and his burden. The following week, Rebecca reviewed inventory reports showing minor discrepancies in the test kitchen supplies. Most executives would have delegated such a trivial matter, but details were her specialty. The head of product development insisted the variations were within normal testing parameters, but something didn't add up. That evening, she stayed late, watching the security monitors from her office. At midnight, Thomas arrived for his shift. By 2 a.m, he had made his way to the test kitchen, where he spent 45 minutes, far longer than required for standard cleaning. Before leaving, he carefully packaged several food samples into containers he brought with him. Rebecca's suspicions deepened. The legal department advised caution. If he's stealing proprietary recipes or selling test samples to competitors, we need concrete evidence before taking action, the head counsel explained. Rebecca nodded, already formulating her plan. I'll handle this personally. That Friday evening, she sent her driver home, telling him she'd take a car service later. Instead, she waited in her darkened office until she saw Thomas's battered sedan pull out of the employee parking structure at 7 a.m. Following at a discreet distance in her luxury SUV, Rebecca tracked him through the awakening city, from the gleaming corporate district into increasingly modest neighborhoods, until they reached an area of abandoned warehouses and forgotten storefronts. Thomas parked behind what appeared to be a decommissioned church, its stained glass windows boarded up, a faded sign announcing services no one attended anymore. Rebecca parked a block away, heart pounding with the thrill of imminent vindication. This had to be where he was selling company secrets or distributing stolen samples. She approached cautiously, staying in the shadows of early morning. Through a gap in the boarded windows, she peered inside, prepared to document everything with her phone camera. What she saw stopped her cold. Inside the dilapidated building, tables had been arranged in neat rows. At those tables sat at least 30 children of various ages, alongside a handful of adults, whose worn clothing and weathered faces spoke of hard lives lived on the streets. And there, moving with unexpected grace among them, was Thomas Gray. Not in his janitor's uniform, but wearing a professional chef's apron. He moved with authority now, his shoulders straight, his movements precise as he served carefully plated meals from the containers he'd brought from Elysian. The children called him Chef, their faces lighting up as he personally served each one, knowing most by name. "How's the science homework coming, Maria?" he asked a girl of about 12. "Did those new shoes fit better, Jackson?" to a boy with a worn backpack. Rebecca stood frozen, her accusatory evidence gathering forgotten as she witnessed a complete transformation in the man she'd been prepared to fire for theft. A small sound escaped her, and Thomas glanced toward the window. Rebecca ducked away quickly, heart pounding for entirely different reasons now. She hurried back to her car, her worldview thoroughly shaken. The janitor wasn't stealing, he was feeding homeless children with food that would have been discarded after testing. As she drove away, questions crowded her mind. Who was Thomas Gray really, and how had she been so completely wrong about him? That evening, in the privacy of her home office, Rebecca began searching online for information about Thomas Gray. Initially, she found nothing, as if the man existed only within the walls of Elysian Foods. Then she refined her search to include culinary schools and restaurants, adding terms like chef and food safety. An article from nearly a decade ago appeared. Star chef blows whistle on food safety violations. The accompanying photo showed a younger Thomas Gray in professional chef whites, standing proudly in front of a restaurant called Sustenance. Rebecca leaned closer to her screen, reading intently. Thomas had been executive chef and owner of a highly acclaimed farm-to-table restaurant with a James Beard nomination and features in Culinary magazine. The article detailed how Chef Thomas Gray had discovered that his primary supplier was using banned pesticides and growth hormones, despite certifications claiming otherwise. Rather than quietly changing suppliers, Thomas had gone public, providing evidence to regulatory authorities and warning the industry. The resulting investigation had implicated several high-profile restaurant groups and food corporations. While the supplier eventually faced fines, the powerful industry connections had ensured Thomas paid the higher price. His restaurant was suddenly denied credit extensions, suppliers refused to work with him, and former allies distanced themselves. Sustenance had closed within 6 months. Further searching revealed the personal tragedy that followed. Thomas's wife Marie had developed unexplained neurological symptoms that medical experts eventually linked to long-term exposure to the same chemicals Thomas had exposed. Her health declined rapidly, leaving Thomas to care for both her and their young son alone. Medical bills mounted as his professional reputation lay in ruins. A small obituary confirmed Marie's death 5 years ago. Rebecca sat back, a knot forming in her throat as she continued piecing together the story of the man who cleaned her company's floors. The final piece came from a local newspaper article 3 years ago. Thomas and his 10-year-old son, Christopher, had been driving back from a job interview when a truck ran a red light, striking their car. Christopher had died at the scene. The article included a photo of a devastated Thomas at the funeral, standing alone by a small coffin. The same age as my Nathan, Rebecca thought, her hand unconsciously moving to her chest. The article mentioned Thomas had used his insurance settlement to establish a small foundation providing meals to homeless children, though no foundation name was listed. Rebecca's research deepened over the next days. She found scattered social media posts thanking an unnamed chef who provided meals to homeless communities around the city. A community blog mentioned a guardian angel, who not only fed hungry children, but also helped with homework and occasionally provided necessities like shoes or backpacks. She discovered a pattern. The locations matched areas where Thomas's battered sedan had been captured by traffic cameras, always in the early morning hours after his shift at Elysian. The man she had suspected of corporate espionage was actually performing a one-man mission of mercy, using food that would have otherwise been thrown away. The realization forced Rebecca to confront uncomfortable parallels. She had grown up with a single mother who often worked multiple jobs, and there had been times when food banks and community meals had kept them from going hungry. Her relentless drive for success had been fueled partly by the determination never to be that vulnerable again. Yet one of her first actions as CEO had been to cut Elysian's funding to the very food security programs that had once helped her family. The company policy she was preparing to enforce against Thomas, prohibiting the removal of any company property, including food slated for disposal, suddenly seemed not just wasteful, but cruel. The moral complexity of the situation kept Rebecca awake that night. By company standards, Thomas was stealing. By humanitarian standards, he was salvaging. By legal standards, it was a gray area. By ethical standards, Rebecca was still wrestling with this question when her phone rang at 5:30 the next morning. The head of product development was calling with news that would change everything. "Mrs. Langford, we have a situation," he began, his voice tense. "Greenfield Organics is alleging our new product line may be contaminated with E. coli. They've contacted the FDA and tipped off the media." Rebecca was fully alert instantly. Greenfield was their primary competitor, and the timing, just 2 weeks before Elysian's major product launch, was suspiciously perfect. Their CEO claims they received an anonymous tip about improper handling procedures in our testing facility. They're calling for a preemptive recall of all Elysian organic products. Within an hour, Rebecca had assembled her crisis team. The testing lab was overwhelmed with samples, but results would take at least 48 hours, by which time stock prices would plummet and retail partners would be backing out. The PR team was drafting statements, but without scientific evidence to counter the allegations, they were shooting in the dark. "We need someone who understands food safety protocols at an expert level," Rebecca said, a plan forming, "and I think I know just the person." Thomas was surprised to be called to the executive floor during his shift. When Rebecca's assistant ushered him into the conference room filled with executives in crisis mode, he visibly shrank, his shoulders hunching forward as if trying to make himself invisible again. "Mr. Gray," Rebecca began formally, "I understand you have some background in food safety protocols." The room fell silent, executives exchanging confused glances. Why was the CEO consulting a janitor during a crisis? Thomas's eyes met Rebecca's, wariness evident. "I was in food service some time ago," he admitted cautiously. Mr. Gray was previously an executive chef with specialized training in food safety, Rebecca explained to her team, watching Thomas's expression shift to surprise. "I believe his expertise might help us identify any potential issues in our processing systems." She turned back to Thomas. "We're facing allegations of contamination in our organic line. Would you be willing to inspect our facility and procedures? We need an expert eye and we need it now. For a moment, Thomas seemed ready to refuse, to retreat back to the safety of invisibility. Then something shifted in his posture, a glimpse of the chef and business owner he had once been. I'll need to see your complete processing protocol, from receiving to storage to testing, he said, his voice stronger than Rebecca had ever heard it. And I'll need unrestricted access to the facilities. The executive started to protest, but Rebecca silenced them with a raised hand. Give Mr. Gray whatever he needs. Thomas moved through the facility with transformed presence, his expertise evident in every question and observation. He examined ventilation systems, checked temperature logs, inspected cleaning procedures. In the main processing room, he stopped suddenly, examining a ceiling vent positioned directly above where test products were plated. When was this ventilation system last cleaned? He asked. The facility manager checked his records. Regular maintenance was performed on schedule last month. Thomas shook his head. Not maintenance, deep cleaning. He pointed to nearly invisible residue around the vent's edges. This could be harboring contaminants that regular maintenance wouldn't address. Further inspection revealed the ventilation cleaning schedule had indeed been modified during recent cost-cutting measures. The deep cleaning that should have occurred quarterly had been reduced to biannually. This would never pass a detailed FDA inspection, Thomas explained, his knowledge of regulations surprisingly current. And it creates a potential cross-contamination risk that could result in exactly the type of problem you're being accused of. Within hours, Thomas had identified 3 additional procedural vulnerabilities that the regular inspection team had overlooked, all resulting from seemingly small changes to maintenance schedules. These corner-cutting measures might save money in the short term, but they create significant liability, he explained to Rebecca. Privately, I can show you how to correct these issues immediately and implement a safer protocol moving forward, one that would actually cost less than managing a contamination crisis. Rebecca watched him sketch out procedural improvements, his expertise undeniable. Why didn't you ever mention your background? She asked quietly. Thomas paused, his eyes remaining on the paper. No one asked, he said simply, and I'm not that person anymore. Before Rebecca could respond, the facility manager rushed in with news. Preliminary tests showed no contamination in their products. Thomas's quick identification of potential vulnerabilities had given them both a defense against the allegations and a roadmap for preventative measures. As the crisis subsided, Rebecca made a decision that surprised her executive team. At the emergency press conference, after announcing that independent testing had confirmed the safety of Elysian's products, she unveiled a new initiative. Today, Elysian Foods is launching Nourish Together, a program that will redirect our quality-controlled food surplus to community organizations serving vulnerable populations. She paused, then added, This program will be directed by Thomas Gray, whose expertise in both culinary excellence and food safety makes him uniquely qualified to ensure that no safe, nutritious food goes to waste while people in our community go hungry. The media was captivated by the story, particularly when Rebecca publicly acknowledged that Thomas had been serving as a janitor at Elysian while secretly feeding homeless children with carefully salvaged food. Mr. Gray's commitment to both food safety and community service exemplifies the values that should be at the heart of every food company, she stated, as cameras captured Thomas's uncomfortable expression at the sudden attention. And trust what Rebecca didn't share publicly was that Thomas had initially refused the position, agreeing only after she promised the program would prioritize the children he had been serving and would allow him to continue working directly with them rather than from a corporate office. When the press conference ended, a small commotion erupted at the back of the room. A group of children had arrived, led by community volunteers, the same children Rebecca had seen through the church window. They rushed toward Thomas, surrounding him with excited greetings. "Chef, we're on TV," a small boy exclaimed, while a teenage girl solemnly presented him with a handmade card signed by dozens of people. Rebecca watched as Thomas knelt to their level, his face transformed by genuine joy as the children embraced him. "Chef Dad," one of the smallest girls called him, and the name seemed to spread among them naturally. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca allocated an unused company facility to be converted into a community kitchen for the Nourish Together program. Thomas worked alongside architects and health inspectors, designing a space that would serve both as a distribution hub for excess food and as a teaching kitchen where community members could learn culinary skills. What surprised Rebecca most was her 10-year-old son Nathan's sudden interest in the project. After years of showing little enthusiasm for anything related to her work, he had begged to visit the community kitchen after school. "Can I help too, Mom? Chef Thomas said he could teach me how to make pasta from scratch." Nathan's excitement was infectious as they drove home from their first volunteer session. Rebecca glanced at her son in the rearview mirror, noticing how animated he had become while describing Thomas's cooking lessons. It had been months, perhaps years, since she'd seen him so engaged. Even more surprising was her own enjoyment of the evening. Rolling up her sleeves alongside community volunteers, seeing the direct impact of corporate resources used for genuine human need, and watching Thomas in his element, teaching with patience and humor. One evening, after the other volunteers had left, Rebecca found Thomas sitting alone on the steps outside the community kitchen, staring up at the stars. She hesitated, then sat beside him, maintaining a professional distance. "The program exceeds all our metrics," she said, falling back on data, as she always did when uncomfortable. "Community engagement is up 300%, and the positive press has actually increased our market share by 2.5%. Thomas smiled slightly but said nothing. After a moment of silence, Rebecca tried again. "You're very good with the children, especially Nathan. He talks about you constantly." Thomas nodded, his eyes still on the night sky. "He reminds me of Christopher, same curiosity, same laugh." His voice was soft but no longer guarded. "Christopher wanted to be a chef too. We were planning to open a new restaurant together someday, once he was older." The simple statement carried the weight of a dream forever deferred. Rebecca felt something shift between them. No longer CEO and employee, but two people who had each lost something precious. Considering what he was doing, he would lose two of his own precious. "I grew up on food bank donations and community meals," Rebecca admitted, surprising herself with the disclosure. "My mother worked 3 jobs, and there were still times when we didn't have enough. I swore I'd never be that vulnerable again." She paused, the irony not lost on her. "Then I became CEO and cut funding to the same programs that once helped us, all for a 2% increase in quarterly profits." Thomas finally looked at her. "We all have moments when we lose sight of what matters. The question is, what we do once we remember." His words carried no judgment, only a hard-won wisdom. As they sat in companionable silence, Rebecca realized something fundamental had changed. Not just in her company's policies or in Thomas's circumstances, but in her own understanding of value and success. The official launch of the Nourish Together program took place 3 months later. What had begun as a crisis management strategy had evolved into Elysian's most successful community initiative. Local businesses had joined as partners, providing everything from transportation to educational resources for the children in the program. Thomas had hired and trained a staff largely composed of formerly homeless individuals, creating a sustainable model that other corporations were beginning to notice and emulate. On launch day, after the speeches and ribbon cutting, Rebecca found herself again, sitting beside Thomas, watching as Nathan helped younger children decorate cookies in the teaching kitchen. "I never wanted to be in the spotlight again," Thomas confessed quietly. "After everything fell apart, I just wanted to be invisible, to do what good I could without anyone noticing." Rebecca nodded, understanding the appeal of anonymity after public failure. "Sometimes being seen is the hardest thing we do," she replied. "But sometimes, it's also the most important." Thomas looked at her thoughtfully. "I don't need to run a 5-star restaurant again, or have my name on a glossy magazine. Keeping these kids fed and safe, that's enough for me now." He gestured toward the bustling kitchen, where lives were being transformed through something as simple as a nutritious meal served with dignity. Rebecca watched her son laughing with a girl his age, their hands covered in flour. "Then let me support you from behind the scenes," she said. "And if you're willing to teach, I think both Nathan and I need to learn how to cook from the heart again." The hesitant handshake that followed lingered a moment too long to be merely professional. For the first time, Rebecca saw Thomas smile fully. Not the polite, careful smile of an employee, but the genuine expression of someone finally being seen for who they truly are. As they walked back inside to join the celebration, the newly installed sign caught the evening light. Nourished together, built for second chances. That night, as Rebecca drove Thomas home after all the guests had left, a comfortable silence filled the car. Nathan had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the day's excitement. "Will you come to our next Sunday dinner?" Thomas asked unexpectedly as they pulled up to his modest apartment building. "The kids would love to have you both there." Rebecca looked at her sleeping son, then back at Thomas. "We'd like that," she said simply. As they drove away after dropping him off, Rebecca caught sight of the Nourished Together sign reflecting in her rearview mirror. The words "second chances" illuminated by streetlights. Two very different worlds had collided by chance, or perhaps by design, creating something neither could have built alone. And in that creation was the possibility of healing, not just for a community, but for themselves as well. The success of Nourished Together spread beyond Elysian Foods in the months that followed. Other corporations began to inquire about implementing similar programs, and Rebecca found herself fielding calls from CEOs who had once dismissed her company's charitable initiatives as unnecessary expenses. "The model is surprisingly cost-equitable," she would explain, sharing data on reduced waste management costs and tax benefits. What she didn't always mention was the immeasurable value, the transformation she witnessed each time she visited the community kitchen, the lives being changed one meal at a time. Thomas's role had evolved as well. While he still personally oversaw the meals served to his kids, as he called them, he had reluctantly agreed to train other chefs in the program's expanding network. "They need to understand it's not just about the food," he insisted during planning meetings. "It's about dignity, about making people feel seen and valued." This philosophy had become the cornerstone of Nourished Together, differentiating it from traditional food assistance programs. Each meal was carefully plated and served restaurant style, with attention to nutrition, presentation, and individual preferences. No one was made to feel like a charity case. The children in the program flourished under this approach. Many who had been reluctant to accept help initially now eagerly participated in cooking classes, where Thomas taught not only culinary skills, but also math through measuring ingredients, science through chemical reactions in cooking, and history through the origins of various cuisines. Several teenagers had shown such aptitude that Thomas had begun mentoring them for potential careers in the food industry. "They have the talent," he told Rebecca during one of their now regular evening conversations. "They just never had the opportunity." Rebecca's own transformation was perhaps the most surprising to those who had known her before. The data-driven executive who had once canceled company picnics to save on expenses now regularly brought Nathan to help serve meals at the community kitchen. Her presentations to the board still included profit margins and growth projections, but now also featured stories of program participants and long-term community impact assessments. When questioned about this shift by a particularly bottom-line anchored board member, Rebecca had responded with uncharacteristic emotion. "The most valuable assets we've built this year won't show up on any balance sheet." Nathan had changed too. Once withdrawn and glued to video games, he now burst into Rebecca's home office each evening with stories from his cooking lessons with Chef Thomas. His grades had improved, particularly in science, which Thomas connected to cooking through what he called edible experiments. Most significantly, Nathan and Rebecca were talking again, really talking, not just exchanging information about schedules and school requirements. One evening, as they prepared a recipe Thomas had taught them, Nathan had looked up from chopping vegetables and asked, "Mom, why did you and Dad split up?" It was a question Rebecca had been dreading for years, but in the warmth of their kitchen, with the skills Thomas had given them creating a new kind of bond, she found herself able to answer honestly. The conversation had been difficult, but healing for both of them. She could not help but think of the vastness of the sea, of the unfinished book title. 6 months into the program, Rebecca received a phone call from the mayor's office. Nourished Together had been selected for the city's annual Community Impact Award. "The ceremony is next Friday evening," the mayor's assistant explained. "We hope both you and Mr. Gray will attend to accept the honor." Rebecca immediately called Thomas, expecting him to refuse, as he had with previous public recognition opportunities. To her surprise, he agreed. "The kids should see that their community values them," he explained. This isn't about me. It's about making them visible. The night of the ceremony, Rebecca arrived at Thomas's apartment to drive them both to the event. She had never seen where he lived, and the modest, efficiency apartment was exactly what she might have expected. Small, but impeccably clean, with a kitchen that showed signs of frequent use. What surprised her were the photographs covering one wall, dozens of children's faces, many of whom she now recognized from the program. "My family wall," Thomas explained simply when he caught her looking. He was dressed in a suit that had clearly been purchased for the occasion, slightly ill-fitting but dignified. Rebecca felt a strange flutter in her chest at the sight of him so transformed from the janitor she had once barely noticed. At the ceremony, after the mayor's introduction highlighting the program's achievements, Thomas stepped to the podium first. Rebecca watched from the side, expecting the brief, uncomfortable speech he had practiced. Instead, Thomas spoke with unexpected eloquence about second chances, for food that would otherwise be wasted, for people society had overlooked, and for corporate values that prioritized human dignity alongside profit. "Everyone deserves to be nourished," he concluded, "not just with food, but with respect, opportunity, and the chance to contribute." The audience rose in standing ovation, and Rebecca found herself blinking back tears. When it was her turn to speak, Rebecca set aside her prepared remarks. "3 months ago, I knew the cost of everything and the value of nothing," she began, meeting Thomas's eyes across the stage. "I measured success in quarterly profits and market share. Then, I followed a janitor to an abandoned church and watched him serve gourmet meals to homeless children, using food I would have thrown away." She paused, gathering herself. "Thomas Gray has taught our company, our community, and me personally that true nourishment comes from seeing the worth in what others discard, whether that's food or people. Nourished Together isn't just a program. It's a promise to remember what really matters." As they left the stage together, Thomas's hand briefly touched Rebecca's back, a small gesture of support that felt monumental in its significance. Later at the reception, as Nathan proudly showed off his cooking knowledge to impressed city officials, Rebecca and Thomas stood slightly apart from the crowd. "You never finished telling me about your plans for the teaching kitchen expansion," she said, attempting to return to the comfortable territory of program logistics. Thomas smiled, seeing through the deflection. "There will be time for that," he said. "Tonight is for celebrating how far we've come." Rebecca looked across the room at her son, animated and confident in a way she had never seen before, then back at Thomas, the man she had once suspected of corporate espionage, now her most trusted advisor, and, she was beginning to admit to herself, perhaps something more. "Yes," she agreed softly, "we have come a long way." The distance between janitor and CEO, between suspicion and trust, between isolation and connection, all traversed in the span of mere months. As Thomas was called away to meet a potential donor, Rebecca watched him go, reflecting on how completely her understanding of value had been transformed. Sometimes the most precious ingredients in life came from the most unexpected sources. And sometimes the most nourishing connections formed when you simply allowed yourself to see, really see, the people right in front of you.